Section 53 of Ulysses. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recorded by John Thomas Coos, John K. Thomas. Ulysses by James Joyce. Part 3, The Nostos. Episode 17, Ithaca, Part 2. What also stimulated him in his cogitations? The financial success achieved by Ephraim Marks and Charles A. James, the former by his 1D Bazaar at 42 Georgia Street, South, the latter at his 6.5D shop and World's Fancy Fair and Waxwork Exhibition at 30 Henry Street, admission 2D. Children 1D, and the infinite possibilities hitherto unexploited of the modern art of advertisement, if condensed in trilateral monoidal symbols, vertically of maximum visibility divined, horizontally of maximum legibility deciphered, and of magnetizing efficacy to arrest involuntary attention, to interest, to convince, to decide, such as K2, Kino's 11, Trousers, House of Keys, Alexander J. Keys. Such as not, look at this long candle, calculate when it burns out, and you receive gratis 1 pair of our special non-compo boots, guaranteed 1 candle power. Address, Barclay & Cook, 18 Talbot Street. Basilikil, insect powder. Veribest, boot blacking. Unwanted, combined pocket 2-blade penknife with corkscrew, nail file, and pipe cleaner. Such as never? What is home without Plumtree's potted meat? Incomplete. With it an abode of bliss. Manufactured by George Plumtree, 23 Merchants Quay, Dublin. Put up in 4-ounce pots and inserted by Consular Joseph P. Nanetti, M.P. Rotunda Ward, 19 Hardwick Street, under the obituary notices and anniversaries of deceases. The name on the label is Plumtree, a plum tree in a meat pot, registered trademark. Beware of imitations. Piedmont, Trumpley, Mootpat, Plamtrue. Which example did he adduce to induce Stephen to deduce that originality, though producing its own reward, does not invariably conduce to success? His own ideated and rejected project of an illuminated show-cart drawn by a beast of burden in which 2 smartly dressed girls were to be seated engaged in writing. What suggested scene was then constructed by Stephen? Solitary hotel in Mountain Pass. Autumn twilight. Firelit. In dark corner young man seated. Young woman enters. Restless. Solitary. She sits. She goes to window. She stands. She sits. Twilight. She thinks. On solitary hotel paper she writes. She thinks. She writes. She sighs. Wheels and hooves. She hurries out. He comes from his dark corner. He seizes solitary paper. He holds it toward fire. Twilight. He reads solitary. What? In sloping, upright, and backhands. Queen's Hotel, Queen's Hotel, Queen's Hotel, Queen's Ho... What suggested scene was then reconstructed by Bloom? The Queen's Hotel, Ennis, County Clare, where Rudolph Bloom, Rudolph Virag, died on the evening of the 27 June 1886 at some hour unstated, in consequence of an overdose of monkshood, aconite, self-administered in the form of a neuralgic liniment composed of 2 parts of aconite liniment to 1 of chloroform liniment, purchased by him at 10:20 a.m. on the morning of 27 June 1886 at the Medical Hall of Francis de Nehy, 17 Church Street, Ennis. After having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at 3:15 p.m. on the afternoon of 27 June 1886 a new Boater straw hat, extra smart, after having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at the hour and in the place aforesaid, the toxin aforesaid, at the general drapery store of James Cullen, 4 Main Street, Ennis. Did he attribute this homonymity to information, or coincidence, or intuition? Coincidence. Did he depict the scene verbally for his guest to see? He preferred himself to see another's face and listen to another's words, by which potential narration was realized and kinetic temperament relieved. Did he see only a small coincidence in the second scene narrated to him, described by the narrator as a Pisgah site of Palestine, or the parable of the plums? It, with the preceding scene, and with others unnarrated but existent by implication, to which add essays on various subjects or moral apothegms, e.g., My Favorite Hero or Procrastination is the Thief of Time, composed during school years, seem to him to contain in itself and in conjunction with the personal equation certain possibilities of financial, social, personal, and sexual success, whether specially collected and selected as model pedagogic themes of cent per cent merit for the use of preparatory and junior grade students, or contributed in printed form, following the precedent of Philip Buffoy or Dr. Dick or Heblin's Studies in Blue, to a publication of certified circulation and solvency, or employed verbally as intellectual stimulation for sympathetic auditors, tacitly appreciative of successful narrative and confidently augurative of successful achievement during the increasingly longer nights gradually following the summer solstice on the day but 3 following Vidilect, Tuesday, 21 June, S. Aloysius Gonzaga, sunrise 3:33 a.m., sunset 8:29 p.m. Which domestic problem, as much as, if not more than, any other frequently engaged his mind? What to do with our wives? What had been his hypothetical singular solutions? Parlor games, dominoes, halma, tiddlywinks, spillikins, cup and ball, nap, spoil 5, bezique 25, beggar my neighbor, draughts, chess, or backgammon, embroidery, darning or knitting for the Palisaded Clothing Society, musical duets, mandolin and guitar, piano and flute, guitar and piano, legal scrivenery or envelope addressing, bi-weekly visits to variety entertainments, commercial activity as pleasantly commanding and pleasing, obeyed mistress, proprietress in a cool dairy shop or warm cigar divan, the clandestine satisfaction of erotic irritation in masculine brothels, state-inspected and medically controlled social visits at regular, infrequent, prevented intervals, and with regular, frequent, preventive superintendence to and from female acquaintances of recognized respectability in the vicinity, courses of evening instruction specially designed to render liberal instruction agreeable. What instances of deficient mental development in his wife inclined him in favor of the last-mentioned 9th solution? In disoccupied moments she had more than once covered a sheet of paper with signs and hieroglyphs, which she stated were Greek and Irish and Hebrew characters. She had interrogated constantly, at varying intervals, as to the correct method of writing the capital initial of the name of a city in Canada, Quebec. She understood little of political complications, internal or balance of power, external. In calculating the addenda of bills, she frequently had recourse to digital aid. After completion of laconic epistolary compositions, she abandoned the implement of calligraphy in the encaustic pigment, exposed to the corrosive action of copperas, green vitriol, and nutgall. Unusual polysyllables of foreign origin she interpreted phonetically, or by false analogy, or by both. Metempsychosis, metempsychoses, alias, a mendacious person mentioned in sacred scripture. What compensated in the false balance of her intelligence for these and such deficiencies of judgment regarding persons, places, and things? The false apparent parallelism of all perpendicular arms of all balances, proved true by construction. The counterbalance of her proficiency of judgment regarding one person proved true by experiment. How had he attempted to remedy this state of comparative ignorance? Variously. by leaving in a conspicuous place a certain book open at a certain page, by assuming in her, when alluding explanatorily, latent knowledge, by open ridicule, in her presence, of some absent other's ignorant lapse. With what success had he attempted direct instruction? She followed not all, a part of the whole, gave attention with interest, comprehended with surprise, with care repeated, with greater difficulty remembered, forgot with ease, with misgiving remembered, repeated with air. What system had proved more effective? Indirect suggestion implicating self-interest. Example: she disliked umbrella with rain. He liked woman with umbrella. She disliked new hat with rain. He liked woman with new hat. He bought new hat with rain. She carried umbrella with new hat. Accepting the analogy implied in his guest's parable, which examples of post-exilic eminence did he adduce? 3 seekers of the pure truth: Moses of Egypt, Moses Maimonides, author of More Nebuchim, Guide of the Perplexed, and Moses Mendelssohn, of such eminence that from Moses of Egypt to Moses Mendelssohn there rose none like Moses Maimonides. What statement was made under correction by Bloom concerning a 4th seeker of pure truth by name Aristotle, mentioned with permission by Stephen? That the seeker mentioned had been a pupil of a rabbinical philosopher, name uncertain. Were other apocryphal illustrious sons of the law and children of a selected or rejected race mentioned? Felix Bartholdy Mendelssohn, composer. Baruch Spinoza, philosopher. Mendoza, pugilist. Ferdinand Lassalle, reformer, dualist. What fragments of verse from the ancient Hebrew and ancient Irish languages were cited, with modulations of voice and translation of texts, by guest to host and by host to guest? By Stephen: Sul, arun, sul, go, sioxar, egus, sul, go, suin. Walk, walk, walk your way, walk in safety, walk with care. By Bloom: Kefelok, Haraman, Rakatech, Mbed, Lazamatesh. Thy temple amid thy hair is as a slice of pomegranate. How was a glyphic comparison of the phonic symbols of both languages made in substantiation of the oral comparison? By juxtaposition. On the penultimate blank page of a book of inferior literary style, intituled Sweets of Sin, produced by Bloom, and so manipulated that its front cover came in contact with the surface of the table, with a pencil supplied by Stephen wrote the Irish characters for G, E, D, M, simple and modified, and Bloom, in turn, wrote the Hebrew characters Gimel, Aleph, Daleth, and, in the absence of Mem, a substituted Qoph, explaining their arithmetical values as ordinal and cardinal numbers, videlicet 3, 1, 4, and 100. Was the knowledge possessed by both of each of these languages, the extinct and the revived, theoretical or practical? Theoretical, being confined to certain grammatical rules of accidence and syntax, and practically excluding vocabulary. What points of contact existed between these languages and between the peoples who spoke them? The presence of guttural sounds, diacritic aspirations, epenthetic and servile letters in both languages, their antiquity, both having been taught on the plain of Shinar 242 years after the deluge in the seminary instituted by Phineas Farsai, descendant of Noah, progenitor of Israel, and ascendant of Heber and Haramon, progenitors of Ireland, their archaeological, genealogical, hagiographical, exegetical, homiletic, toponomastic, historical, and religious literatures comprising the works of rabbis and Chaldees, Torah, Talmud, Mishnah, and Gemara, Maser, Pentateuch, Book of the Dun Cow, Book of Ballymote, Garland of Howth, Book of Kells, their dispersal, persecution, survival, and revival. The isolation of their synagogical and ecclesiastical rites in Ghetto, S. Mary's Abbey, and Mass House, Adam and Eve's Tavern, the proscription of their national costumes in penal laws and Jewish dress acts, the restoration of Chana David of Zion, and the possibility of Irish political autonomy or devolution. What anthem did Bloom chant partially in anticipation of that multiple, ethnically irreducible consummation? Kolod Balejwa Pnima, Nefesh Jehudi Homija. Why was the chant arrested at the conclusion of this first distich? In consequence of defective mnemotechnic. How did the chanter compensate for this deficiency? By a paraphrastic version of the general text. In what common study did their mutual reflections merge? The increasing simplification traceable from the Egyptian epigraphic hieroglyphs to the Greek and Roman alphabets, and the anticipation of modern stenography and telegraphic code in the cuneiform inscriptions, Semitic, and the vergular Kinkakostate Ogham writing, Celtic. Did the guest comply with his host's request? Doubly, by appending his signature in Irish and Roman characters. What was Stephen's auditive sensation? He heard, in a profound ancient male unfamiliar melody, the accumulation of the past. What was Bloom's visual sensation? He saw in a quick young male, familiar form, the predestination of a future. What were Stephen's and Bloom's quasi-simultaneous, volitional, quasi-sensations of concealed identities? Visually, Stephen's, the traditional figure of hypostasis, depicted by Johannes Damascenus, Lentulus Romanus, and Epiphanius Monachus as leucodermic, sesquipedalian, with wine-dark hair. Auditively, Bloom's, the traditional ascent of the ecstasy of catastrophe. What future careers had been possible for Bloom in the past, and with what exemplars? In the Church, Roman, Anglican, or Nonconformist, exemplars, the Very Reverend John Conmee, S.J., the Reverend T. Salmon, D.D., Provost of Trinity College, Dr. Alexander J. Dowie. At the bar, English or Irish, exemplars, Seymour Bushe, K.C., Rufus Isaacs, K.C. On the stage, modern or Shakespearean, exemplars, Charles Wyndham, high comedian Osmond Tyrrell, died 1901, exponent of Shakespeare. Did the host encourage his guest to chant in a modulated voice a strange legend on an allied theme? Reassuringly, their place, where none could hear them talk, being secluded, reassured the decocted beverages, allowing for subsolid residual sediment of a mechanical mixture, water plus sugar plus cream plus cocoa having been consumed. Recite the first, major, part of this chanted legend. Little Harry Hughes and his schoolfellows all went out for to play ball, and the very first ball little Harry Hughes played, he drove it over the Jew's garden wall, and the very second ball little Harry Hughes played, he broke the Jew's windows all. How did the son of Rudolph receive this first part? With unmixed feeling. Smiling, a Jew he heard with pleasure and saw the unbroken kitchen window. Recite the second part, minor, of the legend. Then out there came the Jew's daughter, and she all dressed in green. Come back, you pretty little boy, and play your ball again. I can't come back, and I won't come back without my schoolfellows all. For if my master he did hear, he'd make it a sorry ball. She took him by the lily-white hand and led him along the hall, until she led him to a room where none could hear him call. She took a penknife out of her pocket and cut off his little head, and now he'll play ball no more, for he lies among the dead. How did the father of Millicent receive this second part? With mixed feelings. Unsmiling, he heard and saw with wonder a Jew's daughter all dressed in green. Condense Stephen's commentary. One of all, the least of all, is the victim predestined. Once by inadvertence, twice by design, he challenges his destiny. It comes when he is abandoned and challenges him reluctant, and, as an apparition of hope and youth, holds him unresisting. It leads him to a strange habitation, to a secret infidel apartment, and there, implacable, immolates him, consenting. Why was the host, victim predestined, sad? He wished that a tale of a deed should be told of a deed not by him, should by him not be told. Why was the host reluctant, unresisting still? In accordance with the law of the conservation of energy. Why was the host, secret infidel, silent? He weighed the possible evidences for and against ritual murder, the incitations of the hierarchy, the superstition of the populace, the propagation of rumor and continued fraction of veridicity, the envy of opulence, the influence of retaliation, the sporadic reappearance of atavistic delinquency, the mitigating circumstances of fanaticism, hypnotic suggestion, and somnambulism. From which, if any, of these mental or physical disorders was he not totally immune? From hypnotic suggestion. Once waking, he had not recognized his sleeping apartment. More than once waking, he had been, for an indefinite time, incapable of moving or uttering sounds. From somnambulism, once, sleeping, his body had risen, crouched, and crawled in the direction of a heatless fire, and having attained its destination, there curled, unheated, in night attire, had lain sleeping. Had this latter or any cognate phenomenon declared itself in any member of his family? Twice, in Hall Street and in Ontario Terrace, his daughter, Millicent Millie, at the ages of 6 and 8 years, had uttered in sleep an exclamation of terror, and had replied to the interrogations of two figures in night attire with a vacant, mute expression. What other infantile memories had he of her? 15 June 1889. A querulous newborn female infant, crying to cause and lessen congestion. A child renamed Pad Knee Socks. She shook with shocks her money box, counted his 3 free money-penny buttons, 1 Tlu Tli. A doll, a boy, a sailor, she cast away. Blonde born of too dark, she had blonde ancestry, remote, a violation. Herr Hauptmann Haynau, Austrian Army, proximate, a hallucination, Lieutenant Mulvey, British Navy. What endemic characteristics were present? Conversely, the nasal and frontal formation was derived in a direct line of lineage, which, though interrupted, would continue at distant intervals to more distant intervals to its most distant intervals. What memories had he of her adolescence? She relegated her hoop and skipping rope to a recess. On the Duke's lawn, entreated by an English visitor, she declined to permit him to make and take away her photographic image, objection not stated, on the South Circular Road, in the company of Elsa Potter, followed by an individual of sinister aspect. She went halfway down Stamer Street and turned abruptly back, reason of change not stated. On the vigil of the 15th anniversary of her birth, she wrote a letter from Mullingar, County Westmeath, making a brief allusion to a local student, faculty and year not stated. Did that first division, portending a second division, afflict him? Less than he had imagined, more than he had hoped. What second departure was contemporaneously perceived by him similarly, if differently? a temporary departure of his cat. Why similarly? Why differently? Similarly, because actuated by a secret purpose, the quest of a new male, Malingar student, or of a healing herb, valerian. Differently, because of different possible returns to the inhabitants or to the habitation. In other respects, were their differences similar? In passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness, as, inasmuch as leaning she sustained her blonde hair for him to ribbon it for her, cf. neck-arching cat. Moreover, in the free surface of the lake in Stephen's Green, amid inverted reflections of trees, her uncommented spit, describing concentric circles of waterings, indicated by the constancy of its permanence the locus of a somnolent prostrate fish, cf. mouse-watching cat. Again, in order to remember the date, combatants, issue, and consequences of a famous military engagement, she pulled a plait of her hair, cf. ear-washing cat. Furthermore, silly Milly, she dreamed of having had an unspoken, unremembered conversation with a horse whose name had been Joseph, to whom which she had offered a tumbler full of lemonade, which he had appeared to have accepted, cf. hearth-dreaming cat. Hence, in passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness, their differences were similar. In what way had he utilized gifts, 1, an owl, 2, a clock, given as matrimonial auguries, to interest and to instruct her? As object lessons to explain: 1. The nature and habits of oviparous animals, the possibility of aerial flight, certain abnormalities of vision, the secular process of embalsamation. 2. The principle of the pendulum, exemplified in bob, wheel gear, and regulator, the translation in terms of human or social regulation of the various positions of clockwise movable indicators on an unmoving dial, the exactitude of the recurrence per hour of an instant in each hour when the longer and the shorter indicator were at the same angle of inclination, videlicet. 5 5/11 minutes passed each hour per hour in arithmetical progression. In what manners did she reciprocate? She remembered, on the 27th anniversary of his birth, she presented to him a breakfast mustache cup of imitation Crown Derby porcelainware. She provided, at quarter day or thereabouts, if or when purchases had been made by him, not for her, she showed herself attentive to his necessities, anticipating his desires. She admired, a natural phenomenon having been explained by him to her, she expressed the immediate desire to possess, without gradual acquisition, a fraction of his science, the moiety, the quarter, a thousandth part. What proposal did Bloom, diambulist, father of Milly, somnambulist, make to Stephen, noctambulist? To pass in repose the hours intervening between Thursday proper and Friday normal, on an extemporized cubicle in the apartment immediately above the kitchen and immediately adjacent to the sleeping apartment of his host and hostess. What various advantages would or might have resulted from a prolongation of such an extemporization? For the guest, security of domicile and seclusion of study. For the host, rejuvenation of intelligence, vicarious satisfaction. For the hostess, disintegration of obsession, acquisition of correct Italian pronunciation. Why might these several provisional contingencies between a guest and a hostess not necessarily preclude or be precluded by a permanent eventuality of reconciliatory union between a schoolfellow and a Jew's daughter? Because the way to the daughter led through mother, the way to mother through daughter. To what inconsequent polysyllabic question of this host did the guest return a monosyllabic negative answer? If he had known the late Mrs. Emily Sinico, accidentally killed at Sydney Parade Railway Station, 14 October 1903. What inchoate corollary statement was consequently suppressed by the host? A statement explanatory of his absence on the occasion of the interment of Mrs. Mary Dedalus, born Goulding, 26 June 1903, vigil of the anniversary of the decease of Rudolph Bloom, born Virag. Was the proposal of asylum accepted? Promptly, inexplicably, with amicability, gratefully it was declined. What exchange of money took place between host and guest? The former returned to the latter, without interest, a sum of money, £1 7 sterling, advanced by the latter to the former. What counter-proposals were alternately advanced, accepted, modified, declined, restated, in other terms, reaccepted, ratified, reconfirmed? To inaugurate a prearranged course of Italian instruction, place the residence of the instructed. To inaugurate a course of vocal instruction, place the residence of the instructress. To inaugurate a series of static, semi-static, and peripatetic intellectual dialogues, places the residences of both speakers, if both speakers were resident in the same place. The Ship Hotel and Tavern, 6 Lower Abbey Street, W&E Connery, proprietors. The National Library of Ireland, 10 Kildare Street. The National Maternity Hospital, 29, 30, and 31 Hulls Street, a public garden, the vicinity of a place of worship, a conjunction of 2 or more public thoroughfares, the point of bisection of a right line drawn between their residences, if both speakers were resident in different places. What rendered problematic for Bloom the realization of these mutually self-excluding propositions? The irreparability of the past. Once, at a performance of Albert Hangler's circus in the Rotunda, Rutland Square, Dublin, an intuitive party-colored clown in quest of paternity had penetrated from the ring to a place in the auditorium where Bloom, solitary, was seated, and had publicly declared to an exhilarated audience that he, Bloom, was the clown's papa. The imprevedibility of the future. Once, in the summer of 1898, he, Bloom, had marked a florin, 2, with 3 notches on the milled edge and tendered it payment of an account due to and received by J&T Davy Family Grocers, 1 Charlemont Mall, Grand Canal, for circulation on the waters of civic finance, for possible circuitous or direct return. Was the clown Bloom's son? No. Had Bloom's coin returned? Never. Why would a recurrent frustration the more depress him? Because, at the critical turning point of human existence, he desired to amend many social conditions, the product of inequality and avarice and international animosity. He believed, then, that human life was infinitely perfectible. Eliminating these conditions? These remained the generic conditions imposed by natural, as distinct from human law, as integral parts of the human whole. The necessity of destruction to procure alimentary sustenance, the painful character of the ultimate functions of separate existence, the agonies of birth and death, the monotonous menstruation of simian and particularly human females, extending from the age of puberty to the menopause, inevitable accidents at sea, in mines and factories, certain very painful maladies and their resultant surgical operations, innate lunacy and congenital criminality, decimating epidemics, catastrophic cataclysms which make terror the basis of human mentality, seismic upheavals, the epicenters of which are located in densely populated regions, the fact of vital growth through convulsions of metamorphosis from infancy through maturity to decay. Why did he desist from speculation? because it was a task for a superior intelligence to substitute other more acceptable phenomena in the place of the less acceptable phenomena to be removed. Did Stephen participate in his dejection? He affirmed his significance as a conscious rational animal proceeding syllogistically from the known to the unknown, and a conscious rational regent between a micro and a macrocosm, ineluctably constructed upon the incertitude of the void. Was this affirmation apprehended by Bloom? Not verbally, substantially. What comforted his misapprehension? That as a competent keyless citizen he had proceeded energetically from the unknown to the known through the incertitude of the void. In what order of precedence, with what attendant ceremony, was the exodus from the house of bondage to the wilderness of inhabitation effected? Lighted candle in stick borne by Bloom. Diaconal hat on ash plant borne by Stephen. With what intonation secreto of what commemorative psalm? The 113th, Modus Peregrinus, in exitu Israel de Egypto, domus Jacob de populo barbaro. What did each do at the door of egress? Bloom set the candlestick on the floor. Stephen put the hat on his head. For what creature was the door of egress a door of ingress? For a cat. What spectacle confronted them when they, first the host, then the guest, emerged silently, doubly dark from obscurity, by a passage from the rear of the house into the penumbra of the garden? The heaven tree of stars hung with humid night-blue fruit. With what meditations did Bloom accompany his demonstration to his companion of various constellations? Meditations of evolution increasingly vaster, of the moon invisible in incipient lunation, approaching perigee, of the infinite latiginous, scintillating, uncondensed Milky Way, discernible by daylight by an observer placed at the lower end of a cylindrical vertical shaft 5,000 feet deep sunk from the surface toward the center of the earth, of Sirius Alpha in Canis Major, 10 light years, 57 trillion miles, distant and in volume 900 times the dimension of our planet, of Arcturus, of the procession of equinoxes, of Orion, with belt and sextuple sun, theta, and nebula, in which 100 of our solar systems could be contained, of moribund and of nascent new stars such as Nova in 1901, of our system plunging towards the constellation of Hercules, of the parallax or parallactic drift and so-called fixed stars, in reality ever-moving wanderers from immeasurably remote eons to infinitely remote futures, in comparison with which the years 70 of allotted human life formed a parenthesis of infinitesimal brevity. Were their obverse meditations of involution increasingly less vast? Of the eons of geological periods recorded in the stratifications of the earth, of the myriad minute entomological organic existences concealed in cavities of the earth, beneath removable stones, in hives and mounds, of microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead, of the universe of human serum constellated with red and white bodies, themselves universes of void space constellated with other bodies, each in continuity, its universe of divisible component bodies, of which each was again divisible in divisions of redivisible component bodies, dividends and divisors ever diminishing without actual division till, if the progress were carried far enough, not nowhere was never reached. Why did he not elaborate these calculations to a more precise result? Because some years previously, in 1886, When occupied with the problem of the quadrature of the circle, he had learned of the existence of a number computed to a relative degree of accuracy to be of such magnitude and of so many places, e.g., the ninth power of the ninth power of 9, that the result having been obtained, 33 closely printed volumes of 1,000 pages each of innumerable quires and reams of India paper would have to be requisitioned in order to contain the complete tale of its printed integers of units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions, the nucleus and the nebula of every digit of every series, containing succinctly the potentiality of being raised to the utmost kinetic elaboration of any power of any of its powers. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and the possible social and moral redemption of said race by a redeemer easier of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Conscious that the human organism, normally capable of sustaining an atmospheric pressure of 19 tons, when elevated to a considerable altitude in the terrestrial atmosphere, suffered, with arithmetical progression of intensity, according as the line of demarcation between troposphere and stratosphere was approximated from nasal hemorrhage, impeded respiration and vertigo. When proposing the problem for solution, he had conjectured as a working hypothesis, which could not be proved impossible, that a more adaptable and differently anatomically constructed race of beings might subsist otherwise under Martian, Mercurial, Venereal, Jovian, Saturnian, Neptunian, or Uranian sufficient and equivalent conditions, though an apogean humanity of beings created in varying forms with finite differences resulting similar to the whole and to one another would probably there as here inalterably and inalienably attached to vanities of vanities, and to all that is vanity. And the problem of possible redemption? The minor was proved by the major. Which various features of the constellations were in turn considered? The various colors, significant of various degrees of vitality, white, yellow, crimson, vermilion, cinnabar, their degrees of brilliancy, their magnitudes revealed up to and including the seventh, their positions to Waggoner's star, Walsingham Way, the Chariot of David, the annular cinctures of Saturn, the condensation of spiral nebulae into suns, the interdependent gyrations of double suns, the independent synchronous discoveries of Galileo, Simon Marius, Piazzi, Leverrier, Herschel, Gall, the systematizations attempted by Bode and Kepler of cubes of distances and squares of times of revolution, the almost infinite compressibility of hirsute comets and their vast elliptical egressive and re-entrant orbits from perihelion to aphelion, the sidereal origin of meteoric stones, the Libyan floods on Mars about the period of the birth of the younger astroscopist, the annual recurrence of meteoric showers about the period of the feast of S. Lawrence, martyr, low August, the monthly recurrence known as the new moon with the old moon in her arms, the positive influence of celestial on human bodies, the appearance of a star, first magnitude, of exceeding brilliancy, dominating by night and day a new luminous sun generated by the collision and amalgamation in incandescence of two non-luminous X-suns, about the period of the birth of William Shakespeare over Delta in the recumbent, never-setting constellation of Cassiopeia, and of a star second magnitude, of similar origin, but of lesser brilliancy, which had appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of the Corona Septentrionalis, about the period of the birth of Leopold Bloom, and of other stars of presumably similar origin, which had effectively or presumably appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of Andromeda about the period of the birth of Stephen Dedalus, and in and from the constellation of Auriga some years after the birth and death of Rudolf Bloom, Jr., and in and from other constellations some years before or after the birth or death of other persons. The attendant phenomena of eclipses, solar and lunar, from immersion to emersion, abatement of wind, transit of shadow, taciturnity of winged creatures, emergence of nocturnal or crepuscular animals, persistence of infernal light, obscurity of terrestrial waters, pallor of human beings. End of section 53. Recording by John Thomas Coos, John K. Thomas. www.validateyourlife.com